Hello and welcome back to day 10 of our Bible study in Matthew. We are starting off chapter 7, and it is on a very, very well-known and popular verse. And it starts out, "Do not judge so that you will not be judged." And for our current society, we hear that really often by people who are being judged and don't want to be judged. And it's an unfortunate tendency to cherry pick the one line out of a whole plethora of information. And so I kind of wanted to talk about, I guess, my interpretation on this. So it says, "Do not judge, that you will not be judged. For in the way that you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard, it will be measured to you." So the advice is not to judge, so that you won't be judged with the same standard you're judging other people with. I think it's really tempting to interpret that as at face value of just don't judge anybody ever. But there's a problem with that. And the first problem is that Jesus himself advocates judging others in just a few verses down. When he says in verse 15, "Beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits." By their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? Every good tree bears forth good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. So in order for us to beware of wolves in sheep's clothing, in order for us to be wary of someone who's going to take advantage of us, in order for us to, in another place where he says in verse 6, "Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces." You can't tell who's going to be a dog and who's going to be a pig whenever you're expressing your vulnerability to that person, and who's going to use that vulnerability against you, or going to feign being your teammate, your friend in the moment, and then use it later to backstab you. You can't tell who those people are without discernment and without judgment. So there has to be more to the interpretation of what Jesus is saying than the face value of "do not judge so that you will not be judged." I think there's a couple ways you can do that. And one way that's easy to think about that is don't judge so that you won't be judged. So if you follow that through and you never judge anybody for anything, you'll end up being a very gullible person, a very trusting person. More than trusting, gullible, because you're trusting towards people that you shouldn't be trusting towards. And you'll end up being hurt a lot. You'll end up being taken advantage of a lot. And you'll probably put yourself and those close to you in danger because of it. But you won't judge anybody. And God, knowing and seeing that you don't judge anybody, will be kinder towards you, probably. It might be more complicated if your lack of, or if your presence of gullibility is causing you to not be responsible for people that depend on you, like your family. But that's one way of thinking about it anyway. And then the other way I like to think about it is, instead of inserting the word judge, insert the word condemn, which has its own issues. But if you think about it in that way, do not condemn so that you will not be condemned. For in the way you condemn, you will be condemned, and the standard of measure will be measured right back to you. And so, like, if we condemn somebody who's questioning if what they're doing is sin, and you condemn them, then God's going to condemn you if you don't hold the same judgment call to yourself. And so it's important the underlying statement to all of this is what's very, very important is making sure you're not a hypocrite. Because theoretically, if you were to judge other people and that standard that you judged them by, you held to, then you'd be fine. Which, by the way, I don't think any one of us is capable of doing. I think we all fail in our own standard, and let alone God's standard. But the problem with that interpretation is that the word that's used for judge, the Greek word, I think it's kino or something, it doesn't just mean condemn. It's a more broad term, like our word judge is a broad term. And it can be used for something as simple as scrutinizing or examining and that kind of thing, or it can be something more intense, like a more extreme condemnation or that type of deal. And so I think probably Jesus left it vague on purpose again, like he often does, because it can apply in a lot of situations. But I guess the point that I wanted to get across is it's not as simple as don't judge so that you won't be judged, because Jesus' own advice later in the verses in this very chapter involve making judgment calls through discernment. He says, why do you look at the speck that's in your brother's eye, and you don't notice the whole log that's in your own eye? And then the next part of this is real interesting. You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Under the context of what we're talking about, the speck in your brother's eye is the sin in your brother. That's a small sin, by the way. Another evidence towards the distinction of like the levels of sin, the values of sin. Your brother has a small speck of a sin, and you have a log of a sin. Remove the log of sin from your own eye so that you can see clearly to remove the speck out of your brother's eye. That almost sounds like an advocation towards reproof of your brother, which involves making a judgment call to your brother. So I'm just saying it's more complicated than don't judge so that you won't be judged. One thing I did want to add is that on this note of this section on judgment, something that I personally find myself very uncomfortable with is condemning somebody else's salvation. I don't feel that any of us have the right to make a judgment call on whether somebody is going to end up in heaven or hell. And I think the reason is because we may be able to see things like when Jesus is talking about the evil trees that bear forth evil fruit will be cut down and cast into the fire. We have snippets of how people will be judged and how people will essentially almost choose to go to hell. They choose to live their life away from God, and therefore their eternity is without Him as well. But the intricacies of each individual person's life are so great that you and me are of no match to make a judgment call on somebody else's salvation. We can't see every motive to every action. We can't see every action. We can't see every feeling of remorse, feeling of sincerity. We can't see the genuine motive behind everything that they do or resist or etc. We can't see that, and we don't have capacity to see and process that. But thank God that God does, because that's why He makes the better judge, the best judge. Let's see. In verse 7, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. It goes on to to say, what man of you, if your son asks you for a loaf of bread, we'll give him a stone, and if he asks for a fish, we'll give him a snake. And they're like, well, of course we're going to give him the good gift. And he's like, if you, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more does your Father who's in heaven know? In everything, therefore, treat people the way you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets. And that's actually, now that I think about it, that's a beautiful summary of kind of the spirit of those laws. Treat others the way you want to be treated. It's like what Jesus keeps doing, of trying to take the laws that people are following and try to express to them the spirit that they're not utilizing to follow those laws. It's similar to how a lot of Christians will seek, myself included at one point in time, would seek to work on fixing or doing a task in their life that's in keeping with the commandments of Christ and the commandments of God, rather than allowing the Holy Spirit to change them from within and help them along the way to keeping that law or commandment. It's kind of like a lot of Christians will have issues with of trying to project the perfect Christian atmosphere, the perfect Christian persona. It's all about the outward appearance rather than the inward presence of the Holy Spirit changing you from the inside out, so that your outward appearance matches the Holy Spirit on the inside of you. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who enter through it. For the gate is small and the way is narrow that leads to life, and there are few who find it. Yeah. And then we go on to the tree and its fruit. You will know them by their fruits. So every good tree bears good fruit, and the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, nor can a bad tree produce good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. And so we can kind of reference that with what we were talking about before with our faith, and how we're saved by grace through faith alone, but a saving faith never is without works. A saving faith is never present without bearing fruit, without bearing good fruit. And so if we, in this reference point, are trees and we bear bad fruit, then we're a bad tree. But it's not saying like if you make mistakes then you're a bad tree, right? You can continue to make bad mistakes while you're growing fruit in the right direction, and God's still honoring that. Because you got to remember, like, yes, there's these verses of the bad tree is thrown, with bad tree with bad fruit is thrown into the fire, but it's also those who are bearing forth some fruit, God prunes so that they'll bear forth more fruit. So yeah, you're moving in the right direction. God's going to start cutting off the parts of you that aren't helping you continue to grow. And that'll probably come with pain, but it will increase the fruit that you're bearing that is good. So it's important not to get those two confused. Thank you for watching. I appreciate all of the positive comments, and I'm thankful for any value that you get out of these videos, and see you on the next part.